Recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. This is an extraordinarily complex, as the doctor just said, and difficult issue for all. But, Madam Speaker, I rise in strong support of this bill and the Women's Health Protection Act that we're also considering today. 3 weeks ago today, the United States Supreme Court's unprecedented decision reversed nearly 50 years of established precedent, overturning Roe v. Wade and paving the way for trigger laws across the country to criminalize access to abortion instantly. With this ruling, women in 2022 now have fewer rights than their mothers or grandmothers, and less control over their own bodies and their own health care. Today, the House of Representatives is responding to protect the women of our country. Today, this House will vote to stand with women and affirm their freedom to make their own health care decisions. It is not an easy decision. It is not made lightly. But it ought to be free from interference from politicians. We must do everything, in my view, in our power to ensure that women are free to travel wherever they need in order to access reproductive care safely, legally, without fear of punishment. That's why I brought to the floor this bill, the Ensuring Women's Right to Reproductive Freedom Act. This legislation would prohibit states from preventing, impeding, or obstructing women from traveling to other states for reproductive care or retaliating against them for doing so. Over a century and a half ago, it was legal to own people because of the color of their skin. And they could escape, as Harriet Tubman did, as Frederick Douglass did, from their slavery on the eastern shore of our state, and go to a so-called free state. But then, tragically, the Congress enacted a bill which allowed people to go and reimpose slavery on those folks. Let's not us do the same. This legislation would prohibit states from preventing, impeding, or obstructing women from traveling to other states for reproductive care where it is legal, or retaliating against them for doing so. These draconian, authoritarian laws that states are talking about that are going to criminalize behavior no matter whether it is legal in the state to which you went. One of the first bills I voted on in 1967, when I first went to the state senate, at that point in time, about 8 months out of law school, was to repeal the miscegenation statutes, which said that a black person couldn't marry a white person, or a person of Japanese extraction or Chinese extraction. The Supreme Court held that unconstitutional. And it would be like saying you can go to a state where that certainly is legal for an African American and a Caucasian to marry, but if you come back here, you're going to be a criminal. Draconian, authoritarian, almost communist-like in its dictatorship that China tried to pursue and did. This bill would also extend the same protections to health care providers who perform abortions for out-of-state patients and to anyone who helps them with transportation. Let us not set up a society where people are watching their neighbor and reporting to their neighbor and criminalizing behavior which has for half a century been the decision of a woman. And yes, she could consult her doctor, she could consult others, but it was her body that was at stake, her decision. Additionally, this bill would protect the movement of interstate commerce of prescription drugs approved by the FDA to end pregnancy safely at home. I'm grateful to Representative Lizzie Fletcher, Marilyn Strickland, and Jamie Raskin for introducing this legislation and to Chairman Frank Pallone for advancing it through the Energy and Commerce Committee so speedily. I also want to thank Diana DeGette and Barbara Lee for their leadership on this issue as co-chairs of the Congressional Pro-Choice Caucus. While protecting interstate travel is an important step, Congress must do much more to ensure that every woman in our country can access health care and reproductive choice safely, legally, and affordably. That's why we're also considering an updated version of the Women's Health Protection Act today. I want to thank Judy Chu again for her leadership on this effort. Make no mistake, until we codify Roe v. Wade 49-year precedent in federal statute, women in many parts of our country will not be safe or have access to the health care they need. I'm old enough to remember when it wasn't legal and when people died in back alleys with going to charlatans, not having proper medical care. Let's not return to those dark and tragic days. I urge my colleagues to support this legislation. Support freedom. Support the women of our country. That's the right thing to do. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from New Jersey reserves. The gentlewoman from Washington is recognized.